So in 1925, I tried the amateur circuit, and then, of course, I wanted to be an attorney.
Did you go to the Borscht Belt?
A little. And it started as a farmhouse, but after I got through it, it was more than a farmhouse. Because people would come up just to...
Where was
Uh, no.
it? Monticello?
No, it's not far from Monticello. It was Goldsmith's Farm. That's what it was called. And it was, about 4 miles in after Monticello. Monticello was the brig.
Canianga Lake?
Huh? No, Lake Filton, yes. But I know people are going to laugh, but I can't help that. You see, that's my nature.
We've got the film rolling, so we'll get back to that. Let's get some of the basics that we need to do.
Well, here's what I did.
Remember to look at the...
Matt, what I want you to do
Yes.
is, he's a good boy, but you've got to ignore him a little bit. Because what I want you to do is when you talk, don't talk to him, talk here.
You've got it.
Pretend he's here.
That's right.
We do that when he's in the office. We don't pretend he's
Okay.
not there.
Who signs the checks?
That doesn't matter.
All
They're
right.
too small anyway.
To put it succinctly, Danny Kaye,
Right here.
his name was Danny Kaminsky. We went to school together, only we were a year apart, and he was a funny man, and I remember when he finally made it. I used to play the amateur circuit. The reason we did that, in those days, $2 was a lot of money. So I worked in my uncle's luggage factory for about 6 months, but I worked about 4 nights a week on the amateur circuit. I would dance. Mostly I would dance. I also used to try some comic work, but I wasn't with it completely at that particular time. In any event, I decided that New York was no place to be successful with all the, shall we say, well, everyone was hungry. So I decided to hitchhike to Florida in 1925 during the boom, before the bust. And I bought a ticket on the Pennsylvania Railroad. They used to run a round trip from New York to Washington, D.C. to see the Capitol for $5. So I saved my money. I took the train, and when I got to Washington, I saw people waiting online. I sold them the return ticket for $2, so it only cost me $3 to get to Washington. Then I hiked across the Potomac, and I started to get into Virginia. And by the way, I didn't mention one thing. A cousin of mine was with me. He lived on the east side, and he was big and husky. I was just a thin 92-pounder. In any event, we started to walk across, and this was, it was late in January, and it was cold. So we had one little bag with us. We started hiking, and nobody picked us up. It was getting dark. So at that particular time, when you're walking in mountains and you're making turns, the light that you see in the distance is not close. It's far away because you keep circling or semicircling. In any event, we finally got to a lower flat piece, and we saw some lights in their window in the farmhouse. So we knocked on the gate, and out comes a dark black man with his gun and 2 of his children with guns. I said, just a minute, please. We'd just like to know where we can sleep tonight. We're willing to stay here. We'll pay you for it. He says, well, the white people don't take us in, so we're not going to take you in, even though you sound like a nice young man. And he says, you see that light in the distance? You keep walking, you'll get there. So we did. We walked and we walked. We finally got there. And sure enough, this time we knocked on the gate. A white man with 2 kids with rifles come out. I know it sounds strange, but we were from the city and we didn't know about this stuff. So he says, what you all want? I says, nothing, sir. We got lost and we'll pay for our keep. So he says, how much money have you got? I said, well, we can give you $3 for the 2 of us. He says, all right, tomorrow morning you'll have how many grits? That's exactly what he said to us. So they gave us a bed upstairs. It was very warm, very nice in the morning. They took us to the well to get washed, and it was ice cold. Anyway, she made a breakfast there, some hominy grits or something. We ate it, and I gave him the money, and he wished us well, and we took our way. All of a sudden, a car is coming along. In those days, they picked people up, especially if they weren't tramps. The result was this man was a drugger. I remember his name, Dr. Cornell. He was a druggist. And the reason he was going on the road was because he heard about the boom there and he was loaded with some money and he decided to buy real estate. So he stopped us and asked us where we're going. I said, anywhere she'll take us. So he laughed. He says, hop in. He drove us all the way to Miami, and when we stopped off at a hotel at night, he asked us if we have any money. We said, yes. He said, well, I'm going to bring a cot in here, 2 cots, for you people to sleep in the same room. Now, this is hard to imagine, but he had, remember the bathing suits they had? They had a top and a bottom in those days. People forgot about that. And he had a money belt around him, and he undressed in the same room that we were in, and he had thousands and thousands of dollars there. So I looked at him, and aren't you a bit concerned? He said, no, you kids are all right. I'm not worried about you. And he drove us all the way to Miami. In Miami, he says he may only stay there about a week. He says, can I reach you anywhere? I said, the best thing to do, we'll drop you a line care of General Delivery. And he gave us the name down, Dr. Cornell. And as we're walking in the street, my cousin and I know it's a strange story, all of a sudden he said, Leo, who's walking towards us? Leo. My aunt, that is my cousin's mother, used to shop at the grocery store on Rivington Street, right off Clinton. The result was they had a place for us to stay. Now, my cousin was not, I would say, he was a nice young man, but he was a little more backward. He was bashful. He was taller than I. So he got a job in a restaurant as a cleaning up dishes and all. And I went into the department store and I told him that I'd like to see the luggage department. I spoke to the head of the luggage department and he said to me, what is it I can do for you? I said, well, I'm in the leather goods business and I just got down here and I have to eat so I could repair luggage that's been torn up. In those days in the trains, they used to always throw it around, you know, and your luggage got beat up. So he said, how old are you? I said, 17. He said, well, what do you know about it? Well, what have you got to repair? So he gives me a mahogany leather bag, and it's a little rip. I said, get me some mahogany shoe polish. He gets me the shoe polish. I caked some of it up. I fit it in. I smoothed it out. I made the grain just the way it should be. He said, you got a job. So every day I would do that. Then I went over to the Postal Telegraph, which is not in existence today. And I asked him if he's got a job for a young man to deliver telegrams. And he says, do you know the city? I said, no. He said, well, how do you expect to deliver the telegrams? I said, well, you're getting telegrams all day to office buildings. I can always find the building. You know what he said to me? You got a job, but here's a quarter. Go get yourself some soup. So I don't know whether this is what you want me to come up.
Let me stop you for 1 second.
Mac, this is all happening in 1925.
Right. Yes,
This is happening
in 1925.
and we're now in Miami.
It was in the second week in January of 1925.
And
Answer him here.
Oh yes,
let me go back for a second.
yes.
Mac, where and when were you born?
I was born in Harlem, 8385 East 111th Street on the 4th floor. In 1908, March the 21st, the first day of spring.
And did you live until you left Manhattan?
When we left Manhattan, we moved to Brooklyn because we were then already 3 children. And they felt that they used to say there was a tree grows in Brooklyn, but it was true. It was like a country. Yes.
Interrupt you just a little bit.
What, you go ahead. I'm patient. And I'll do whatever you want.
Is there any possibility that I could have you come up because you're leaned backward? If I can have you,
How's that?
let me take a look.
We'll just walk this in.
That's okay. Whatever.
That's better.
Okay.
All right, we're rolling.
Mac, when were you born and where?
March the 21st, 1908. I was born at uh, on the fourth floor. I said the address
Right.
before. Now I don't know. On the fourth floor in well, at that time that was East Harlem. That's what it
In
was.
East Harlem. And when did you leave Manhattan?
Well, when we left Manhattan, well, as I said before, they said that the tree grows in Brooklyn, and my mother had more of an education than my dad, who was in the garment business. And she told me that we're going to move. I was more or less the favorite son because we were only, when we moved there, I was exactly 8 years old. We moved to Brooklyn, and that was in 1929. And of course, I had to transfer schools and so forth, but we managed okay. There was no problem.
The did you stay in Brooklyn until you left New York?
No, I didn't stay in Brooklyn until we left New York. When if we have to backtrack, we're back to going to Florida again.
We'll get there.
All right.
But from Brooklyn, you went to Florida.
No, from Brooklyn, yes, we went to Florida.
Now, how many were in your family?
Well, it was my sister Betty is 3 years difference besides me, and my sister Edna is 6 years difference from me, and then my kid brother, he was born when I was 10, and he was born at 284 Snedeker Avenue, in back of a butcher shop, believe it or not,
In Brooklyn?
in Brooklyn. And I was the one that was supposed to go running to all the relatives to tell them there's going to be a bris within the following few days. So I did my chores. My father had to go to work. My mother was still in bed a while. And I went around to tell all the families who were our families. And then they had it in the house about 5 days later.
Did you speak both English and Yiddish?
I also spoke a bit of Hebrew, but I spoke Yiddish fluently. Wenn Sie fragen mich, Akash, ich kann allemal antworten, was Sie wollen wissen. Ich can interpret it from English to Jewish and from Jewish into English. I have no problem.
And where did you go to school?
I went, well, of course, I went to school in Brooklyn first. I think that was PS 150. It so happens that particular question about where did I go to school, her name, I was in the 4th grade. I said when we moved there, I was about 8. And then I said I was in the 4th grade, so now I'm about 12. Her name was Mrs. Greenberg, and she took a shine to me. She figured I was a bright kid. So she taught me how to multiply with 11. I've used it all my life. It's a short algebra to be effective. She used to teach me multiply 6 times 3. 6 and 3 is 9. No, add, not multiply, add. 6 and 3 is 693, because you add the 6 and the 3 and you wind up with 693. And I used to use it a good part of my life. Somebody would say to me, 6. Well, 2 times 4, there's 6 in the middle, it's 264. That's how I'd get it. So I used it for quite a while, but then it got a little tough. When you go into the third figure, I didn't take algebra, so I had no way of knowing. Now, what else?
Where did your family originate?
My mother came from Palestine in 1892, and that in itself is a story. But before I tell you that story, my father was born in Kiev, Russia, to this country. My father's sister married one of my mother's brothers, and that's how they met. So it was a family get-up together. And the odd part of this is all the relatives in those days used to live within 1, 2, or 3 blocks of each other. And I was constantly hungry. I was always hungry. I never got enough to eat because I was the oldest, so the younger ones got more. So I'd get finished my mother would say, you go over to Tante Sarah. That means go over to your Aunt Sarah. And she'd make a meal for me. I was always hungry. But that's okay. The people starve all over the world. I managed as well. It's no big deal.
Bar mitzvah was in Brooklyn?
The bar mitzvah was in Brooklyn, on Sheffield Avenue, Brooklyn. It was a little frame building. We moved from 284 Snedeker Avenue in 1912. And we moved to 329 Sheffield Avenue. The synagogue was 2 doors away. And now when you mention Sheffield Avenue to me, I have to tell you a story, which is basically true, but it worked out. When we had a convention at the Waldorf Astoria some years ago, we used to play punchball on the streets of Brooklyn. You had a softball, no bat, you hit it with your fist or with your palm. And now the bases were a tree, a sewer, marking with a crayon for sight, and then home plate. Now what I did, and I know this sounds a little out of the way, but it's true, because I've got the proof to back it up. I think I have it in my briefcase. We were 6 fellows that used to play ball on that street. 50 years later, I rounded them all up, and I arranged a punchball game on Sheffield Avenue with the help of the police department. They blocked the streets with patrol cars. When we pulled up with 2 Cadillac limousines, the neighbors where I lived came out and said, we all look like no strangers around here. And I said, honey, I'm not a stranger here. My heart is here. I was raised here. She threw her arms around me, kissed me. She says, you go right to it. The police had arranged for 6 black young men. I outfitted them with shoes, uniforms, and we taught them how to play punchball. Then I told the police to do me a favor. They blocked the streets back and forth. I says, here's $30. Do me a favor, go out. I want you to buy Danish pastry, milk, coffee, and hot dogs. Spend it all. And I went over to Mrs. Matthews, and I says, you've been very nice. Will you loan us your kitchen so I can bring all these people up? She says, be my guest. They brought the stuff in, and when the cop walked in, one at a time, it was cold. So they came in to warm up and have a cup of coffee. One of the black kids says, man, look at that fuzz. Look at that fuzz, man. The mother said to him, they're not fuzz. They are policemen. They're nice people. So I think we did a pretty good job. And I've been in touch with them, and they've been in touch with the LA Police Department. But LA, South LA, is a little on the rough side. Only recently, I tried again to work something out. But frankly speaking, I don't want to get shot, because they don't want that kind of help. So that's that chapter. And believe me, every word of that is true, and I can just picture the street right now.
Mac, let's go back to Miami.
Yes, sir.
You said that you had seen somebody named Leo on the street?
Leo was my cousin's. His mother owned a grocery store on Rivington Street and Clinton Street.
On the Lower East Side.
On the Lower East Side. And my aunt, who's my cousin's mother, used to shop in his mother's grocery store. So we had a place to stay for a couple of days to get adjusted. That's how that happened. He went into a restaurant. I told him, go in and be a busboy and pick up the stuff. That's no problem. It's honest work. I said, I'll go into the leather goods department. And I was getting paid too. But we didn't know what to do yet. So in any event, I figured the real estate was going so fast that telegrams were a tremendous thing. So I went into, as I said, the Postal Telegraph. I asked them if I could have a job delivering. I still have the cap Postal Telegraph. I've got it somewhere at home. And he said, you look a little hungry. He threw a quarter down on the counter. Go have yourself a plate of soup. So I had a plate of soup, and I came back. He says, how are you going to know where to go? I said, you don't have to send me out of town. Just give me where the office buildings are, and I go in, I can deliver all the telegrams. And, well, you're a pretty smart kid. Okay, here. Gives me a bunch of telegrams, tells me to go. I found the places, and I delivered. I was getting tips. Didn't sound so bad. Well, at least we ate. He was taking home food from the restaurant that looked good, and I was making a little money. Now, one day, I delivered a telegram, and this is the starting of a career. I delivered a telegram to Dave Rubin. Who was Dave Rubin? The stores on Flagler Street were all real estate offices, one after another. Real estate offices. That's what they were doing. People were coming in from the Midwest, the farmers with overalls, buying real estate. The boom was on. So I get a telegram to deliver to this particular store, to Dave Rubin. And I walk in and I hear music. See, they played music, so when the farmers go by, the rest of them, they'll go in. Then they pin flowers on them. A pink flower means maybe it's easy to get at. The white flower means leave them alone. They had their own way of doing things, and I got wise to it right away. But I was wondering what they're doing with the dancing there. The result was, he said, we provide entertainment, so they come in. I said, I can dance better than that. He said, what are you delivering telegrams? I said, I have to eat. He says, I'll tell you what. We give a prize. Anyone who can beat him gets $5, and he gets a job for $15 for every night. Well, I had just got finished with the Charleston contest in the Polo Grounds and danced in front of 60,000 people. I'm not boasting about it. I didn't win, but I was a good dancer. So he says, you come here tomorrow night and you're going to dance. I didn't have my proper clothes, so I borrowed pants from Leo, who was taller than I, so my pants were falling and I was dancing. But I did my number, and then I found out how they worked the racket. It was very simple. If the one who was the native, who was doing the dancing for the house, that's fine. If you got somebody to go a little faster than he did, they fluffed up the music and threw you off beat. Well, they threw me off beat, but I was able to carry it. So when I got through, he says to me, you take that damn cap off tomorrow. From now on, you're getting $25 a night. Well, naturally, it started something. So I was dancing, and then New Year's of 1926, he booked me into the Fairmont Hotel in Miami Beach. I remember it like it was yesterday. And I really was a good dancer. I was a dance team with my sister when we were in Brooklyn. In any event, he booked me in the Fairmont Hotel. And this was a hotel where, shall we say, our people could go there, but they couldn't go to some of the other hotels in those days. And they had Frank Novak in his orchestra. Is a gentleman from Chicago of Polish descent. And the reason I say Polish descent, something happened after that, which is very interesting. What happened was, I remember, as I finished my first number, a gentleman came over to me, say, boy, come over here, I want to ask you a question. You're a Jewish boy? I said, yes. He takes a $100 bill out. He says, can you dance a kazatska? I says, I sure can. He tears it in half. He says, $50 is for you and $50 for the orchestra leader. Now, you got to talk to the orchestra leader. Now, he was a Polish, but he knew music is music, so he played it. You know, in those days, they didn't do the horror. They did other stuff. But I did a hell of a number, and this man, whose name was Mr. Rubin, was the Rubel Ice and Coal Company in Brooklyn, New York, which I didn't know. He was a multimillionaire. I did the dance, and I told the Polish gentleman what to play. He did. He came over, he took it back, he gave us a $100 bill. He said, you don't have to tear it up, just divide it. So I said, okay. Now, Dave Rubin hears about it. He says to me, from now on, I'm going to advertise you to give lessons to the Society Women in Miami Beach. I was every bit of just not quite 18 years of age. And it was a good business. I walk around with a portable Victrola and call on them. The husbands were in New York, working in Wall Street. You couldn't come down in a hurry. There were no planes. The ship took 3 or 4 days. The train took 2.5 days. They were all lonely, and I was 18. Anyway, I gave the lessons. So I started to make some more money. But then I started to get appealing letters. My mother was missing me. My father was teed off because he thought I should be working with them. The result was that I was, after getting some pleading letters, oh, by the way, my 5 other friends, when I said about Punchbowl, I got to revert to that for the moment. because what they did, people were different then. People were kind to each other. People shared with each other. It doesn't happen today. What they did every Sunday, they went to visit my mother and father, stopped off at a grocery store, bought a lot of food, brought it into the house, and sat down and had breakfast with my immediate family, because I was missed by everyone there. And I don't say that boastfully. They just missed me. And I missed them too. They sent so many letters that finally I decided. I went down to the shipping area. I found out which is the next boat that's going to New York. And I told them, I gave them my credentials. And I said, I'll be a dance instructor on the ship. Just give me my passage. So I landed back again in New York. And my father couldn't wait for me to come off. He jumped over the fence. He almost fell into the water. And my friends were all there. Well, again, it sounds boastfully, but not. The party lasted for 8 days. The relatives, the friends, everyone came. The prodigal son had returned. Well, those things happen in life. Well, now, back to the luggage factory again. Working. But I played amateur night theaters, and I'd get $3 a night. If you won first prize, you got 5 more. If you won second prize, you got 3 more. You got third prize, you got 2 more. So you were practically guaranteed $3 a night for 5 nights. It's $15. That was more than I was making working in the luggage factory. Then I started to be on the funny side a bit. So some farmhouses in the Catskill. I never went big time because I never had the opportunity. I had too many in the family I had to take care of. I don't know whether I would have made it. I could. I've been funny at times. The only difference is a person has to eat and a person has to have regards for his family. And that's the way I felt. And to this day, I still tell stories. I still tell jokes. And I'd like to tell one now, which I told at the table the other day. It's a little risque, but not that bad, but it's truly funny. Even though Henny Youngman, whom I knew, was a nice man and says, "Take my wife, please," this is entirely different. In the first place, jokes are made to be told and not to offend anybody. Some people are offensive, but not to put it, here's the way some of our people who made it big. Take Danny Thomas, for instance. Danny Thomas was not Jewish, but he could pray in Jewish and Hebrew. He was well versed. He was playing the Paramount Theater in New York one day. It was Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish holiday. On Jewish holidays, the theaters are full. You still can go to a theater after synagogue. So he's on stage and he's telling a story. He says, 2 Jews got over a streetcar in New York City. So the audience kind of moved. He says, oh, pardon me. He said, when I said 2 Jews, I didn't mean that. The first streetcar in New York was in New York City. It's the first streetcar in the world. And as it happened, 2 Jews were on that. But to make you all happy, here's what it is. 2 Chinese got off a streetcar in New York City. One says to the other, "Was will wir essen for Pesach?" Well, everyone laughs because it is funny. And you can tell these stories. There are plenty of clean stories. At the moment, I can't think of any. All of a sudden, it'll come to my head. But that's different. I still do stories. Now, one of the things we do now, there were 14 of us at one time in Beverly Hills that helped the Jewish Family Service, food for the elderly citizens who go to the Levin Center once a month on Sundays for their lunch, and we provide entertainment. I MC the shows. I dance with them sometimes. One day I was dancing with a little old lady there, and she says, "Maybe you'd like to come up to my apartment and have a cup of tea." I says, "I'm sorry, my wife is sitting there." She says, "So what?" That's the women. Now, the reason we say that, the proportion of women to men, we take a head count every time, every Sunday of the last Sunday of the month. If there's 127 people there, it'll be 8 or 9 men. The rest are all women. So I get on the microphone and I told them, you worry them to death, and that's why they die earlier. That's all. I make a joke out of it, but it's true. Now, there used to be 15 of us doing it. We're down to 4. That's because of our age factor. They passed away. course, I'm going to be 90 in a day. One man is 1 year ahead of me. He's 91. The other one is 86, and the other one is 89. Now, we four meet every Tuesday at the Friars Club, and that's where we have our lunch and figure out what we're going to do that particular Sunday of the month and what we'll do for them with entertainment and so forth. And we do that. I also have given my services to the Cedar Sinai Hospital for elderly Jewish patients who cannot talk English. And believe me, there's a lot of them there today. So I spend my time on some of that also. But I find plenty of time to do things. Of course, I'm not so active in business now. Not that I can't, but enough is enough. I think that if you can do some good for people, fine. If you can't, don't go around rousing anyone around. As far as I'm concerned, we're on this world to do some good. If you can't do any good, don't do any harm. Now, you know, in life, funny things happen. I got to go back to leather goods again. In 1930, there were two companies in the United States that produced the frames of a Gladstone bag. The frame, the handle, the lock in the middle, and the two catches at the end. That's what you had. But people could steal from you, even from your locker. They'd lift up that part, spread it apart, and steal your clothes. So I kept working on and I developed something which I had patented. Now what I did was this. I arranged for two slides of little pieces of steel underneath the frame, and when you turned the key, it sent it over into the hasp, so you couldn't lift it up. And we called it, some kind of a proof name. I forgot the name. Oh, burglar proof. And I remember the name, the Samuel Breyer Company in Philadelphia. He told me he'd give me a big order if I'd give it to him exclusive. So I told him I'd give it to him exclusive for the state of Pennsylvania. But I've got a lot of manufacturers in New York. I can't do that alone. He says, well, that's being fair. And he went to the new process company that was like a Sears Roebuck, you know. And he came back with an order for plenty of luggage. Now I had orders for plenty of frames. Now I got a patent on it. And the man that was backing me was an elderly gentleman by the name of Mr. Goldie. I remember him now. He used to import Spanish tile, and we got together once, and he arranged this to come in from Germany. And everything was going fine, and as God is my witness, in 1932, my income was over $15,000 a year, and that was a lot of money. Mac Kotler had arrived, helped his parents, got him automobiles, did what you had to do, what a son has to do. Younger people, so happens, my brother was a talented young man. I came home one day from work, I heard somebody tapping on a tin can, and Vincent Lopez and his orchestra was playing on the radio, and my brother was keeping perfect time. Next day, I went to Philadelphia. I had a cousin that had a set of drums. I saved money for a suit. I bought the drums, forget the suit. I brought it home. My brother finally made the Juilliard School of Music, and for your edification, he was Frank Sinatra's drummer for 30 years, and he was being paid $100,000 a year, and Sinatra loved him. Unfortunately, my brother, at the age of 70, went to sleep and never woke up. So I remember when he was born at 284 Connecticut Avenue, when I got to tell every relative, I have a brother. Oh, you know, some stories are good to tell. Some stories are not easy to tell.
Mac,
Yes, sir.
how did you get involved in the scrap business?
I'm leading to that when I said to you that I said something to you that the frames, that's it. Now comes the story of how I get into the scrap business.
1 second.
Yes. How did I get into the scrap business? Oh, God.
Say that one more time. Start again.
How did I get into the scrap business? I said, oh, God. He blessed me. How did I get in? Very simple. I was selling frames to the luggage manufacturers. All of a sudden, there's a Hitler. And sure enough, the two companies that supplied the industry prior to my entering in with frames, and I won't mention the name because it wouldn't be fair, they were not actually in love with our people. But if you had to buy frames, you had to buy it either from one or the other. They had the same price, antitrust, but in those days, people didn't have antitrust like they're educated today. So I came along with a frame, a better one, with a patent, with a lower price. My earnings the first year was about $18,000. That was a fortune. But I really earned it, and I was really going to town. So Hitler came along. Who do we have luggage manufacturers? Specialty Suitcase Company, my uncle, Samuel Berkman. Everlast Suitcase Company, my uncle, Harry Bernstein. No use mentioning more. They knew and I knew. So we had a problem. But problems can always be solved, but it hurts. One thing they told me, the luggage manufacturer said, Mac, you're a nice young man, but we're not going to buy German merchandise. I said, I came here for another reason. I want to tell you that all I'm going to ask you people to do is please buy what we already have in the warehouses in the United States, and please buy what's already en route from Germany to the United States. So at least we can get out of the mess without getting hurt. And if things work out, we'll thank you now, but we'll take care of you later too. Well, things were really rotten because one day you're sitting on top of the throne and the next day back again you are. Of course, I had some money though. That was the difference. I could manipulate a bit. Well, it so happens we had a discussion one day, some Jewish people, and I was at that meeting because I had been importing from Germany. And I told them what I did. They thanked me. They said, what are you going to do now? I said, I don't know. I got to do something. I'm not poor, but I got to do something. Somebody said to me, you know, Mac, you're a good salesman. We want you to go up with us to the American Hebrew. That was an Anglo-Jewish publication published in New York, a fine, well-written magazine. It was a glossy magazine. I came there, they interviewed me, and they said, you have a car, don't you? Yeah, I had a Graham Page supercharger. I forgot to tell you that. After all, if you make a buck, you got to spend a buck. So he says to me, we send out a crew every weekend for a couple of days, calling on Jewish merchants in department stores, in stores, and what we want is for them to buy the American Hebrew magazine and also to buy some within the confines of their city for a public school, for a high school, for a library, for the church, and so forth. Why? Because they wanted to express our views, naturally being anti-Hitler. Well, I was at a loss of what to do, and I had this nice automobile. I was still well dressed, and they gave you a reporter's card for the fact that you're going to interview Jewish people. So I called on merchants and so forth and tell them the story. And then the big deal of the story was, because I didn't want to have a phony deal milking people for money if it wasn't on the square, I found out that they lived up to it. What they did, we asked them if it's possible, they should buy 3 magazines, send one to a church of their town, send one to the library of their town, and to a school of their town. And all the cost would be $15 for 3 of them, $5 for them. To get the magazine is $20. And I seemed to be very convincing because I wasn't a kid anymore, and I had made money, and I was okay. And they just couldn't figure out what to do with me because they told me to take this cruise to Allentown and as close as possible. I said, my God, you got Jews all over the United States. Why do I have to go there for? So they made a deal. They said to me, Mr. Kotler, You can go anywhere in the United States you want. We like what you're doing. I got married before I even left. In other words, Sylvia and I were married in 1936, 1st of November. A week later, we were on the road.
How did you meet her?
I beg your pardon?
How did you meet her? How did you meet Sylvia?
How did I meet Sylvia? Oh, that goes back to the farmhouse again. Her sister was married to a boy that worked in the post office. After all, that was a steady job, you know, and $1,800 a year. And he had a Chevrolet coupe, and he used to polish it every day. Well, that's the way people were in those days. So she told her sister, Sylvia, who's my wife, that she's going to go up to the mountains and she'll go along. Maybe you'll meet a boy. Well, I told you I was up that mountain. I used to dance with the girls and so forth, and tumble around a little bit. I didn't care so much for being a pro. I could have, maybe, I don't know. I'm not sorry. So I met her. But the odd part was, under no circumstances, you know, I'm a little dry. I need a glass of water.
So when you married Sylvia,
Right. So she invited me over to, what happened was, I didn't have her phone number. Now, I took a walk with a friend of mine on Sutter Avenue, Brooklyn, a cold, wintry night. We just took a walk. And all of a sudden, we bumped into a young man who was at the mountains at the same time we were. He was a nice young kid, but he was a kid. I didn't consider him a man. And he started to boast, and he takes out a picture of my wife, who was now, of course she wasn't my wife then, showing that he took a picture with her. It was in a photo mat, you know, probably put in a dime or something, and he got a picture. And he started to brag how he's going to be engaged to her and all that. And it didn't make sense to me, and I didn't know where to reach her. So I concocted a story on the spot, and I told him about, remember the other girl was there? The model of my friend Louis Alphen, who was in the ladies' underwear business. He says, yeah. I said, well, she's in the hospital. She had appendicitis out, and when I saw her, she asked me if I could reach Sylvia to let her know that she's in the hospital, because she met her in the mountains. So I says, I didn't know. So he says, oh, listen, I'll be glad to give you the phone number. Now, if I didn't meet him on that street, we were going to take a walk, I never would have seen her, because I didn't know where to find her. But that was the way life works out, I guess. And the result was that I called her up, I made a date with her, and then I met her, and then I met her family. Her father looked at me as if I'm a city slicker. You know? He was well, I would say he was a pious Jew. And in any event, we did get married, and that's when we started to travel. Now remember, we didn't have much money, but everywhere as I went, and the people that I called on were very gracious. I personally think I did a very good job, because it was bad times, bad times. Every time you were one of our religion, you weren't even liked here, or you weren't liked there, and you can't keep fighting all the time. In any event, Sylvia and I kept traveling across the country. And as we traveled across the country, we're leading to a question, how does fate work? One habit we had, we'd pull into a town, mostly small towns. She would go to a department store so she could keep warm, and she'd find a sandwich so to eat, see? While I would work town, the Jewish people, call on 4 or 5 different families, and then proceed to the next town. Then we'd stay in a motel and so forth. We traveled across country all the way, and we're in Laredo, Texas. In Laredo, Texas, I go into the Laredo National Bank. I forgot the name of the Jewish gentleman. He was the owner of the bank. I went in to give him my talk. He was of German, Yiddish of German descent, but a very fine man, a very intelligent man. And by this time, I had become a bit more professional in my talk with these people, because I learned a lot from the people I was talking to about their sons, daughters, what's happening. People are going into service, you know, things are going on. So 9 times out of 10, whenever I visited a small scrapyard or a large scrapyard, it didn't matter. They always were very gracious. They always bought the magazine, and I wouldn't leave until they would tell me where they're going to send the other 2 or 3, write down the addresses to go to the church, tell our side of the story. as of what Hitler was doing. And I enjoyed doing that work because I think it was for a good cause. Of course, I earned a living. Oh, I didn't get fat, but we ate. We did okay. And we wind up in Laredo, Texas, and we already had worked a little further past that. But I said, Sylvia, we better start heading back. She says, whatever we have to do. So I stopped off at his bank, and my reporter's card in there. And sure enough, he came out, a portly gentleman. What can I do for you, young man? So I gave him my press card, and I showed him the American Hebrew magazine, and I told him what I would like him to do. As you're not obligated to do anything. If you like what I'm going to tell you, take care of it. I told him what's going on. You know, we had some of these horror pictures where they're hanging the Jews, and you have to use some pressure. So he looks at it, he says, young man, you're doing a wonderful job. He says, what are you doing here? I said, well, we recently got married. He says, we're on a honeymoon. He says, you know, from here to Monterrey, Mexico, is only 134 miles. I'll tell you what you should do. It's almost Christmas now and Hanukkah. Where are you going to go? I said, I don't know, we're going back. No, go on a honeymoon. Takes a business card out, writes out, please extend all the courtesies necessary for Mr. and Mrs. Mac and Sylvia Kotler to the Ancira Hotel, one of the finest hotels in Monterrey in 1936, so was, yeah, no, I don't remember. No, it doesn't matter. And we went in, they gave us a room with a swimming pool, with a balcony, and then he gave me the name of a man who originally came from New York, who was a silk salesman, but he had developed tuberculosis. And because he had developed tuberculosis, they figured that Monterrey, Mexico, which is high up, it's mountainous actually, the climate would be perfect for healing. Well, evidently, after a number of years, he healed, so he opened up a little gift shop. His name was Mr. Rubin. I just happened to remind myself. He said, you go into him also, and he'll take care of you. Because Rubin was depositing money in his bank in Laredo. I found that out, too. So here's a funny situation. All of a sudden, you meet a man, and here we are dining in a beautiful hotel. It was brand new then. Swimming pool, everything. Next day, we went over to see Mr. Rubin. He says, tonight, we go to dinner at the American Club. What was the American Club? In those days, all the engineers were Americans. They lived in Monterrey in this American Club. And they were the ones that were doing the mining in those days. After that, the Mexican government decided to use their own engineers. Well, that's okay. So we met all these people, and then they had drinks there, so we had a beautiful night. We stayed there 2 days. We drove right back. I thanked them, and then we continued. This time, I went straight back to New York. In other words, we got married in November. We left in November. I came back in December.
Mac, we need to speed up a bit. So
All right.
let's
What do you want?
let's start with your entry into the scrap
Right,
industry and
right.
what it was like.
Right. Now, when I came back to New York, I didn't like that so much, what I did. It was good work, but to me, it wasn't professional business. It was charity work, which is fine. People have to do that too. But as it happens, I noticed when I went to some of the scrap dealers, I used to see on their desk the Waste Trade Journal, Daily Metal Reporter, Daily Millstock Reporter, all for the scrap trade. And Mr. Charles Lipset was the owner. So I found out the office because I saw it in all these scrap plants. And I figured, heck, I could sell advertising. So I went into their office and I spoke to Mr. Lipset. Yeah, he'll give me a job for the Pacific Coast because he says Mr. Lazarus is getting older and he travels in the Midwest and he doesn't have to go that far. So I says to him, well, that's fine. And what will be my drawing account? He says, you'll get advertising and we'll get paid. Then you'll get paid. I said, oh, no, sorry. That's no way. I said, how are we going to live? He said, well, that's your business. He was kind of a hard man a bit. So Harry Lazarus, when I came out, he says, well, what happened? So I told him, he says, don't worry about that. I'll give you a drawing account. I'll give you part of my territory and you can have the Pacific Coast. But part of my territory, if you get business, I get it. That's fair enough. That's fine. So I got the position. I took Sylvia. We put our bridge set that we had for a gift in the back of the car, and we went traveling again. Difference is, this time I was calling on scrap dealers. Well, it reached a point where I said, you know, Sylvia, I may have reached my niche over here and I may work out some things, because I noticed one thing. Every time I was in a scrapyard in their office or whatever they had for their offices, they all had daughters. The boys were already going into service or going to the university, so they shouldn't be drafted. They go later, right? That's what happened. So I said, well, that's the best we can do. We'll just do it. We traveled all the way to the Pacific Coast. This time, we drove down the Pacific Coast into LA. When I got to LA, the reason I always picked up money was general delivery in the post office. You know, I finally got Mr. Lipset to be a person who would take care of things. So whenever I reached certain towns, there'd be a telegram, general delivery, and then I'd go into the post office. I'd pick up a check. So when I got there, I remember it was September. And I'm in this place talking to a scrap dealer, and he says to me, yeah, his name was Ike Miller, a nice gentleman, very nice company, Eureka Iron and Metal Company. He says to me, young man, he says, how often do you do this? I said, well, this is my job right now. And I would tell him my story about the frames. He'd say, well, you don't have to do that. I'll give you money for these things that you need, but why don't you come to work for me? So my first job offering was $250 a month plus car expenses. Well, that wasn't too bad. In 1926, my wife and I found a little apartment. I took it. Unfortunately, you know, things work in very strange ways. Most of the scrap yards wound up with relatives, sons, nephews, uncles, because they stayed within themselves, they needed the help, and they shared. There was a foreman working in this plant whose son was being groomed to be an outside buyer. He gave me a rough time. I don't blame him for it. He wanted to protect his son. So I walked up one day to Mr. Ike Miller, may he rest in peace. I said, Mr. Miller, I'm sorry, I don't think there's room for me here. And he was an understanding person. He said, I'd really like to have you here. He still had horses and wagons in those days. Well, so I left. That's when I picked up again with the Waste Trade Journal, Daily Metal Reporter, and I put in my time. I attended their meetings. I wrote it up so that the magazine could publish it. I became a member of the Klan, supposedly. And one day, I went up to Mr. M.F. Berg, Misha F. Berg. And I said, you know, I've had a lot of experience in the country calling on scrap dealers. He said, well, the way you talk, I see that. He says, how would you like to work for my company? I says, well, I'd love it, but I don't have the experience, sir. He says, you don't have to worry. I'll give you enough to live on. They had 3-4 companies. They had the wiping rag laundry business, from, you know, rags. They had paper and rags in another division. That was mill stock. They supplied the Pioneer Flint coat. They'd make roofing out of some of that stuff. And they also had an iron yard and a metal plant, and they also had an ingot plant. They were the largest ones on the Pacific Coast. So I received a position with them, and Sylvia and I settled down. We got a furnished apartment. They could live, and well, of course, naturally, the wife got pregnant. And we were doing very well. We were very happy. But something was lacking, and we didn't know what. Maybe we missed our relatives or so. Next thing you know, my father come out. How he came out, he was a friend of Dubinsky, who used to be the union leader in New York, the garment business. So Dubinsky said, you want to visit your son? Jaime, here. Here's $50. Go to the bus station, buy a ticket, stop off in Dallas, go into this plant, he'll give you work for a week. You get finished with that, take another bus and go to Los Angeles, see your son. You think my father didn't do it? He was in the 70s. He shows up in Los Angeles. Of course, we were happy to see him, and he saw his first grandchild. You know, things that happen in life, that's natural, that's all. Well, the next thing you know, I brought my mother out, and I brought I brought 11 families out to California. I put them in business. Some of them became very wealthy. You can't talk to you after they get wealthy, but that's okay. And we had a good life. You know, we wound up with 2 sons-in-law in my business, and we were a sizable outfit. But one thing I learned that in our time, we didn't need a fax machine. We didn't need many contracts. You called up a man, hello, Ira, I need 50 ton number 1 copper. He said, I got it. What are you paying? 37 cents. I can get 37 cents FOB here. I said, I'll pay the freight. You got a deal. Okay. You sold, I bought. If not, he would say, you bought, I sold. And that was our contract. Now, fax machines, contracts, lawsuits, what for? Your word is as good as your brain, and your brain should work in the right way. There was no problems. Well, to cut it short, we were very, very lucky, very successful. I wound up representing the Phelps Dodge Copper Corporation, the largest mining company in the United States. Very friendly. They were wonderful people to us. They gave me all the pleasures of life. I did a wonderful job with them, and that's where we are at the present time.
Mac, what was the name of your company?
The name of the company, one was California Byproducts, then the Copper Alloys Corporation. The reason was California Byproducts Corporation was the first company that I formed when I went into Mr. M.F. Berg, as I told you. I'm leading back to it now. One day I said to him, Mr. Berg, don't you think I'm entitled to a decent raise? He says, that's the problem, with a bit of an accent. That's the problem. We train you, and then they go into business for themselves. Well, that's life. I says, what harm is it to you if I go into business? I might be supplying you material. But I don't want to go into business. I'm happy with where I am, but I want a decent wage. Well, he starts telling me the story. Twice he's done it already, and twice they went into business for themselves. Well, I wouldn't promise you that I'm not going to go into business for myself. I have no idea what I want to do. I know I'm here. I know I'd like some additional monies to live on. If you can pay it, fine. Now, the odd part of it was I was not a junk dealer in the sense of the junk, because I did a different thing. I was capable of calling on Lockheed, Northrop, North American Aviation. I wound up with aircraft company scrap. First of all, I was clean cut. I wasn't an old junk dealer. I came in to the Department of Sales, and they would take me out to their yards, and I'd look at stuff, inspect it, and tell them I'll give them an analysis of it, bring it back to the plant, get the analysis, and tell them what it's worth. I don't know of anybody in the world that did what I did. Douglas Aircraft in El Segundo, and I've got the proof to back it up. We were buying their aluminum chips, you know, the grindings after they planed something off the machine, you know. And it's like aluminum chips, pieces of rolls and so forth. And where they're working, you know, they got drums there. They're throwing the oily rags in there, cigarettes in there, and so forth, and contaminating the aluminum. So I sat down and write them a beautiful letter and telling them that they've got a war effort going on here. You shouldn't do that. You've got to do something. Post some letter, tell them they can't do that. I'll show you a letter where they thanked me for it, and they installed the drums so they can throw in all the oily rags, not to start a fire, not to throw in all that stuff. Well, it got to a point. I know if you speak to somebody in the industry, they say, well, he's bragging. I'm not. The mighty Aluminum Company of America called up our company one day, not me, but the company I worked for, and they told the owners, the Berg family, would you lend us Mr. Kotler to go to our plant in Knoxville, Tennessee, so that we could help the war effort? Oh, that was quite a compliment. I was just an honest young man trying to do the right thing. I was spared going into the service because they wouldn't take me because of what I was doing. I had a general wanted me to go in Europe. I had an admiral that wanted me to go to the Far East.
Mac, when did you start your own?
All right. So after I was with the Berg family for quite a while, parted very nicely, I gave him back the company car. I went and I bought my car. I opened a company called California Byproducts Corporation in a small way. And I built a small plant of my own, building, offices. And at that time, I was very heavy in the aluminum business because aluminum was being poured out all over the countryside. One day, the Douglas Aircraft asked me to come down. Whether people believe it or not, I don't care because it's the truth. They had so many aluminum shavings and borings that they were putting it in the street. They asked me what to do about it. I went back to the Berg Metal people and I said, look, you were afraid I was going to go into business. Okay, I'm in business. Do you want to buy this? He says, how much are you going to make? I said, you tell me what I should make and I'll do it. And he did. They used to have rubbish trucks come in every morning. The Armenians in those days in LA were in the rubbish business. And they'd come to unload the cardboard and the paper and all that kind of material. Now they're empty. So I made a deal with all these Armenians. If they'll go to Santa Monica, they'll be loaded with a truckload of aluminum shavings, one after another. 11 of them in one day. Bring it into Berg Metal, they put it into their furnaces and made aluminum. Now, you needed a little common sense. I was not in the scrap business. I never knew anybody in the scrap business. I just used some common sense, and I tried my personality to be nice and don't steal and don't cheat and do a job. After all, there is a war and people are getting killed, and I lost out because of Hitler. So I had to do the other thing, which I did. So now I figured, well, everything is going fine. Well, now I brought out 8 families to California. I had to put everyone to work. Now I got a family business.
And your second company?
Second company, Copper Alloys Corporation. I did that for a different reason. One day, I went over to the plant of Phelps Dodge Copper Corporation. They had a tube mill in Los Angeles. A tube mill making copper tubing. They can utilize scrap. In other words, you don't have to get the copper ore out of the mine. Copper above the ground is also useful. In fact, I gave it a coined name and everyone used it after that. I used to say, I sell the mine above the ground, which was true. And the present manager there at that time was a fine gentleman. And I said, I'd appreciate if you take me to the back of your plant so I can see what you do. And I think I can help you, sir. He said, okay, Mac, let's go. We went out there. He was a fine man, Mr. Kent. And I showed him, why do you do this? My God, a scrapyard does better than that. He said, what do you mean? He said, you're putting loose wire on pallets. A tow motor picks it up, brings it over to the smelting department, and you dump it into the furnace. You're going back and forth all day. The material should be briquetted first. You get more weight. You make half the trips, maybe a third of the trips. He says, are you sure? I said, why don't you come over to my plant and I'll show you the machine? And I did. He says, well, we're way behind time. I said, well, he said, what happens after you get it briquetted? I said, look, when it comes in, you unload your truck. They send in big bales. You split the bales. They all loose. Now you make a briquette in the machine. You pile them on pallets. Now you're walking in, instead of 400 pounds, you're walking in with 4,000 pounds, or whatever the case may be. And he says, well, you're a bright young man. And he gives me the name of the vice president of Phelps Dodge in New York that I could call him, because they did the purchasing there, not L.A. So I called up, and may rest in peace, Mr. John Michael Patrick Boyle, fine man. He says, don't come to New York on my account. I said, sir, I'm not going to work on your account. I'm going to Chase Brass, to some others. It was a white lie, and he knew it too. He says, okay, you come on to New York. He says, see me at 3 o'clock on a certain day. I walk into his office, and a tall-looking, nice American Irishman. It seems like we hit it off in the very beginning. He gave me 15 minutes at 3 o'clock. At 5:30, he says, come on, let's go down Greenwich Village, I'll buy you a steak. We went down, we hit it off right away for some reason or other. He seemed to like the way, I told him I don't have that much experience, but I said, business is business. Wherever you can cut corners, honestly, you should cut it. He said, I like what you say. I want you to prove it. I says, well, let me put it to you this way. I receive copper all day long from truckloads, wagon loads, and I says, we briquette it. What you need is a briquetter in your plant. You can keep buying all day long. You briquette it. Well, it's an idea. He'll tell you what, let's go down to Greenwich Village, bought me a steak. He says, there's the man that told me he'll only see me for 15 minutes. We got all through that evening. He says, see me tomorrow for lunch. So I came there tomorrow, and I remember the name. Hank Phillips was his assistant. We seem to have hit it off right. Hank takes me up to the Waldorf Astoria to shoot pool. So we shot pool. And they were very nice. I stayed there 3 days. He's a young man. He says, you go back to L.A. to see Mr. Kent. Give him these ideas that you told me. I will give him carte blanche that he should do it. I think you're right. Just like that. Well, I was elated. So I came back, and I borrowed a machine from somebody else, which was above ground. Mine was sunk in the ground. And I delivered it there, and I said, Mr. Kent, here's what Mr. Boyle said we should do, to experiment. If the experiment is successful, that's what he would like you to purchase from me. So we did. It was very simple. It was no big deal. You didn't have to be a genius. I was never in the scrap business, but common sense dictates to do something where you can save money or where you can do it in a quicker time. Well, the first order he gave me was for 50,000 pounds. So what happened was this. Naturally, I had a plant, but I was a younger one, and I wasn't a veteran of the scrap business, so to speak, against all those that we had there. But I was well liked with the people I did business with, and there was an honest shake, and that's it. So I figured, well, how am I going to work it out? So I figured the best thing to do is to be honest. So I called up Mr. Boyle. I said, Mr. Boyle, I have an idea, and this is something I don't want to discuss over the telephone. If I can get a half a day with you, I said, well, we can sit down, we can work something out. He says, such as what? I says, I want to take you to your own plant in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and show you something. We go to New Brunswick, New Jersey. They had a furnace. It was called a shaft furnace. And in the shaft furnace, you couldn't put choppings in and get the full content. And they didn't realize it. By me, it was done by magic, or it just fell into my head. So he said, you seem to like to do things. I said, yeah. He said, well, all right, look, I'm not going to give you a contract, but I'll do this for you. I'll never give you 100%. You'll get 90%. Now, will you recommend somebody for the 10%? So I said, I'll be glad to. And I did. But, the prices go up and the prices go down. One day, they order 1 million pounds, so I get 900,000 pounds. The other guy gets 100,000 pounds. The order was a little under the market at the time. Well, hell, you're working with people. You take the order. The guy that had the 10%, he says he wants more money for a scrap. So Mr. Boyle said to me, Mac, he says, you won. You got the whole thing now. That's it. And I supplied Phelps starch for 25 years. Millions and millions of pounds. Only difference is I didn't produce it in my plant. I told them it's cheaper to buy it from the other people. But they were always worried about the content. That no phony business. So I told them that's our department. We'll check it. If there's anything wrong, send it back. They told me to teach their people in the plant what to do, so I went into the plant. You'll always find, when you're invited to a plant, the people that work in the shops, they never like a stranger to come in to tell them what to do. I learned that also. Why? They're afraid it'll take away part of their work. In other words, they used to make brass tubing. Now, brass tubing is made out of 70% copper and 30% tin, or whatever they want to put in it. They have different mixtures. Well, brass shells is made out of that. And if you buy brass shells and throw it into the furnace, you can still produce the tubing without adding anything. It's already got the adding. You see what I mean? The result is They save money. The last big deal I bought for them was 400 ton of brass shells in Seal Beach in the Marine Corps. So the fellows that work in the shop, they're mad. They think they're losing out. They're not. They finally came around. They understood it. Take the shell, throw it in the furnace. Next day, you're going to make tubing.
Mac, what was the total years of your involvement in the
Oh, in the industry, well, what happened was,
I mean, how many years?
I'll tell you right now. I went on and I started in 1944 or 45. I went in until about 1990, and I was considered the king of the copper business on the West Coast. It was a fair deal for everybody. I never took advantage of anybody, and they never took advantage of me. And Phelps Dodge was very happy because they saved a lot of money. I coined the phrase, there's a mine above the ground. Now you must understand what I'm saying.
You've gone over that before. Let me go to, because we need to wrap up. Let me ask you this. You've been involved in history and its predecessor association.
Oh, NARI was the first one, National Association of Recycling Industries, and there was the National Association of Secondary Industries. So I was the chairman of the Government Sales Committee. For your edification, and I don't say this boastfully, I just received the gold medallion from the Department of Defense, from the Department of Commerce, for the work that I did for the government, doing the work. I never asked for a penny. I neglected my business. They sent me to the Pacific. I was in Majuro. I was in Kwajalein. I was in Eniwetok. I was in Guam. The government asked me to go. I went. I received letters, and I don't say this boastfully. I can show you letters from generals, from colonels, thanking me for my knowledge and that helping them as I did.
Mac, were you an officer of NARI?
Yes, I was chairman of the Pacific Coast Division, and I was chairman of the Government Sales Committee. Now, you must listen to this. NARI had somebody else on the top there. I don't want to mention names. People know about it, and if you know, fine. If you don't, it doesn't matter. He resented me a bit because I became, shall we say, too much in the forefront. Not because I was looking for it. Cy Wakesberg would call me up. He says, Mac, we got a meeting. Got to go to Alexandria, Virginia. Colonel Buswell, he wants you to be there. So I went. I get a telephone call. National Defense Executive Reserve. We want you to arrive tomorrow morning. I got the telegram in the evening. You're going to deliver a talk in Fort McNair, Virginia. That's Fort McNair, Washington. I delivered a talk there too, and it was considered one of the finest talks in the United States on recycling. And I don't boast about it. I'm happy where I am. I've got a nice family. I've got nice kids.
How many children do you have now?
Daughter of 59, a daughter of 55, a daughter of 53, a son of 49, 7 grandchildren between 23 and 36, and a great-granddaughter. And I've got wonderful people. My great-granddaughters, when I go home on the 28th, a week after my birthday, they're running a big birthday party for me. They don't want anyone to be interested in it. They want to make it themselves. 8 grandchildren. I'm a proud man. And
It's been a great interview.
well, I don't know what's great and what isn't. I'll tell you one thing. I'm happy what I am. I was always honest. I didn't look for the edge. And thank God I've done well. I brought 7 families out to California. One of them wound up being the National Lumber Supply. He was offered $15 million and wouldn't sell it. I had to lend him $240,000 2 months ago. That's life.
One last thing. You had to do it over again.
Yes?
Would you get into the scrap industry again?
Oh, definitely. I would have got in. I would have done the things a little differently. I would have done things a little differently. It wouldn't have been to any other extent, but they all know me. I don't. You know why you're resented sometimes? Because you're outspoken. Sometimes you're resented because you're too much in the limelight. Well, I don't care who's the boss. I don't care if he's the chairman. If he does the right thing, fine. Otherwise, I'll knock him on his ass. That's the way I am.
What's the best advice you have for the future generations?
For the future generations, I think it's a wonderful industry to be in. I think the future generations, heck, you say future generations, give me a minute. I got to tell you this. You know, I usually come well prepared, but I've got so much damn stuff, it's a pain. Here, I want to show you something very funny. When I told you about the 8 grandchildren, here, take a look at it. I want you to look at it.
You have to hold it up.
I'll hold it up. What it says here, oh God. What it says over here is a birthday celebration, an old picture with a pipe in my mouth, right? On this side it says, read it, Max 90 years old. Please join us in celebration. March 28th, 1998, 5 o'clock p.m. Your presence is your gift. Dinner and dancing. Given with love by his grandchildren. That's all you need in life. What if people go around fighting, arguing? I don't do that. I don't like it. Listen, it's been a hard road. It's been a tough road. I could have been a comic. I could have been a dancer. I always had to give up for somebody else. My brother was the greatest drummer in America. Gene Krupa was a hophead. Buddy Rich was an actor. My brother graduated Juilliard School of Music after playing on a tin can until I bought him a drum. That's the kind of a life. And I'm proud of it. And nobody will ever tear me down.